So now we get to Dr. Jon Peddie's presentation, which is about, so what can this future look like? So let's welcome Jon to the stage. Please give him a round of applause.
Hi. Glad to see you all here. I'm glad to be here. I was telling some of my friends here, it's an incredible traffic jams here in California now. California, especially this part of California, has an extraordinary employment factor, and it's having multiple effects on society. One is we can't go anywhere because it's so damn crowded on the freeways. Two is no one can live anywhere because there's no place to live that you can afford. And three is prices at the restaurants have all gone up. That's the part that really hurts. Am I doing this right? No? Yes? Okay. So we're here at TIFCA. This is, I guess, my second TIFCA. And the first one was last year at GDC. And what Neil asked me to do was to try and give you a vision and a view of where we came from and where we are headed. In case anybody in this room doesn't know us, Jon Peddie Research, we do market research, product testing, special reports, but all focused around graphics and the pixel. So we chase the pixel. That's the view from our office. So I believe there have been 5 generations of computer development over the years. And I don't do that on the basis of architecture, but I do it on the basis of how one engages with a computer. The first engagement with computers was on a one-to-one basis, where an operator went to this massive machine, spent literally days loading data into it, not that much data, but it just took a long time to load it, and then waited a day or two more to get an answer. And so that's the way we did computing back in 1946. This machine was built, had 2 jobs. It was funded by the Army Research Center, and its 2 jobs were to calculate trajectories of missiles, of cannon, and things like that on ships. So when it was commissioned, World War II was still going on. When they finished it, the war was over, so the job that it was built for didn't actually exist that much. So the second job they found for it was to count census. And it did that for a very, very long time. Now, 1946, 45. 20 years later, we got to timeshare. This was one machine to many users. At this exact moment in time, not this exact moment, but at this period of time, Moore's Law was just starting to be realized. We were just starting to get the sense of what Moore recognized as the doubling of transistor density. And look at the size of that little, does this have a thingy on it? Excuse me, I'm going to experiment with this. Yeah, is that working? So look at the size of that little box compared to what you saw in the previous one in just those many years, those just 20 some years. So we could start to see what was happening in the development. Jumping up further ahead, we jumped into the 3rd generation, and now we're back to one-on-one. But notice this only took 10 years. So in 10 years' time, we're moving faster in terms of the type of developments that we're making, but at the same time, we're kind of back to the future with what we do about it. And so we had the personal computer, or the microcomputer is how it started, became the personal computer, and this created a problem. This computer was a solution looking for a problem. When people got these things, they said, boy, that's really great. What do I do with it? So consumers had no real experience, no contact with computers. We had them in offices, and we had them in scientific labs and in the military, but from consumers, we didn't have them at all, so we had to try and figure out what to do with them. And it took a little while before that happened. Another thing happened, and that is that although Moore's Law was now clicking along and moving very, very rapidly, communications or data transfers were not moving at the same rate. And so it took another 20-some years before we got the network that we have today that would allow us to communicate effectively with what's in, now we're calling the cloud, and with our personal computer. So prior to that, we had little islands of compute. We had the individual sitting at his or her machine, and then that might have been connected to a server in the company, and that might have been connected to a server elsewhere that represented a more remote global sense. But the interactivity was almost non-existent. You would transfer files typically at night, or you'd start a file transfer and go get some coffee or do something like that, but it was far, far, far from interactive. All that changed when we got to 3G and then to 4G, and now we had much, much faster communications. We got to Cat5 on Ethernet, we got Wi-Fi, and then the Wi-Fi speeds kept going up. And the net result was that we now had the ability to communicate much more rapidly, moving files much quicker from servers to our individual PCs. But we're not finished. That's not the end of the story. That's really kind of the beginning of the story. It's the beginning of how and why we're here and where we're going to go. But the thing to remember, keep in mind, is when you talk about revolutions, especially in the computer industry, they really aren't revolutions. They're not something that happens in a week or a month or even a year for that matter. They take a very, very long time to happen, and there's a lot of overlap as one type of solution starts to fade out and the other one starts to come online. And that's what you're going to see here. We were having a little discussion, a few people here this morning, about 5G. And we all had our own forecast for when 5G was going to be something we would universally experience and realize. And the numbers varied from 10 days to 1 year to 10 years, which means that we don't know. We really and truly don't know. And there's a lot of variables associated with it. It's deployment, it's line of sight communications, it's microcells, it's tariffs, international standards, et cetera, et cetera. It could very well take 10 years before we have fully deployed 5G that will bring all the promises that we've heard about 5G. But we're not going to wait for that. We can't afford to wait for that. So we're going to start using what we can get of 5G. And as we do, our lives and our behavior is going to change. Now, I love this picture for a variety of reasons. The tub is where we are right now. And you're either in that tub or you're about to put your foot into that tub. It's immersive computing. And so the other reason I like this picture is think of all those little duckies as being processors. And that's the point I want to try and make very strongly here, is that we are now immersed in processors. We carry processors in our pocket. We have processors sitting in front of us. We are connecting with other processors that are nearby, called edge machines, and then further away and called the cloud. So we have processors everywhere. Buildings have processors. Our cars have processors. Airplanes have processors. Retail stores have them. You can't escape them. They're all over and everywhere. And they're talking to each other more and more, and they're talking to each other about you. So the machines become invisible as they proliferate, and our interface to the machine becomes a display. And the display becomes interactive the closer we get to it. So we'll get information on screens, and then we will give information to the screens. One scenario I like is a retail situation where they have large 40-inch displays, and often they'll have a picture of a person looking at you. And you've seen the science fiction examples of this, where you walk into a store and it says, "Hello, John, how are you today? I see you're wearing that nice blue shirt that you like so much. We're having a sale on red and yellow ties that would go with that very well." Now, imagine it said that. Maybe it wouldn't say John, but maybe it would say, "Hello, sir," or "Good morning, customer," whatever, and then tell me about a little sale. If I pause in front of that display because it's addressing me, and I look at it, there's at least 3 cameras in that display that are looking at me. And they're looking at what I'm looking at. Am I looking at the upper right-hand corner, the upper left-hand corner, or down, or am I looking away to see where my kids are? That gives it more information. If I actually am looking at something that they're trying to promote, that gets registered, and guess what? Another message comes up that makes it more compelling for me to go find out what that thing is they're trying to sell. We're there now. You don't see it in every store, but you're going to see it in more and more stores. I'm sure you've also heard about the Amazon grocery store. We have one in downtown San Francisco right now. And that's a store where you can walk in and you cannot spend any money. You can't use a credit card, you can't use Bitcoins, you can't use anything. You walk in, you get what you want, and you walk out. Done. Totally cash-free situation, because it's monitoring you. Now, on the shelves in that store and the other Amazon store, visualize a retail shelf, they have 300 sensors per shelf. Why? Because they have to keep track of the inventory. You pick up a box of cereal because you want to see how many calories it has in it, and you put it back, but you didn't put it back in the exact same spot. So the cameras are there to say, okay, he put the inventory back. It's not where we had it last time, but we can live with that. And it monitors that and controls that. 300 cameras per shelf. Think of all the shelves. And that's just one store. So all those sensors are out there, and some people are calling that IoT. And all those sensors, excuse me, have a processor associated with them, up close and personal. And then they have another one nearby, which is being called edge, and then that one talks to yet another one, and it does it very, very quickly. Now, these machines that are going to be all around us and on us will become an integral part of our life. And one of the ways that that will be expressed, is through augmented reality. Augmented reality is going to totally change our lives. It's another one of those 1 year, 5 year, 10-year predictions as to when it's going to happen. And you may not even know it when it happens. It'll be so ordinary to you, just like you don't really remember when you got your first smartphone. You have a general idea, but you don't really know when that moment was, and you don't care. So we will wear glasses. The glasses will not be obnoxious. They won't call attention to themselves. They won't look any different than prescription glasses that we're now wearing or sunglasses that we might wear sometimes. These glasses will give us lots of information as we need it, as we ask for it, and it'll also record what we're doing. And that's kind of the magic part. Come in. And that's kind of the magic part, because now we have effectively our own personal black box. Is there someone crawling through the pipes? Somebody trying to get out of the building the hard way? So we'll have our own personal black box, which will keep track of all the things that we see and do. And what that does for society is it eliminates arbitration, it eliminates he said, she said. A lot of people are afraid of the police because the police have been aggressive and they're operating on a fear-based system, and they don't know if they're going to be attacked, and so their idea is attack first. If such a situation should occur where you get stopped by the police, you'll now have a recorder that will keep track of who said what and who did what. You now have what's referred to as an honest witness, and that eliminates the debate about who did what and who didn't do what. That's great. That sounds great in the short term in terms of giving you some freedom from stress should you encounter some other problem. Perhaps you're in an automobile accident, or perhaps you get bumped into and almost pushed into an oncoming subway. All types of scenarios exist for that. But what it's really going to do, once we realize that this is happening, it's going to change the way we behave and act towards each other. If I knew that everything I was doing was being recorded by you, I'd be much more polite to you than I have been. And so that's going to change us, and that's going to give us a new type of society. However, that data has got to be managed, and that's where we're going to really take advantage of 5G and edge computers. Now, that all sounds great. We can all envision that. The time scale is variable by depending upon who's doing the envisioning. But we have a challenge that's beyond the technology. And that's the challenge of how do we get this fully deployed so that everybody benefits from it. You know, you've heard the expression from Stevenson, who said the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. That's how it exists today, and that's how it could exist going forward unless we take some positive action to correct that. For one thing, the technology has to be accessible and it has to be affordable. Right now, there's about 2 billion people on Earth who don't have access to good communications, good information sources, good entertainment for that matter. Those people are at a disadvantage. Those are the people you hear about being on the other side of the digital divide. One of the disadvantages that those people suffer from is the source of information. What is their source of information? They don't have a world view. They only have the view and the opinion that is given to them by their local leader, and that may in turn come from some higher up leader, and that's a narrow point of view that is self-serving by the deliverer of the message. So the advantage we have is that we have multiple points of view that we can go out and tap into. Now we may select what we want to hear, and that's our own personal bias, but at least we have the choice. A third of the world has no choice in the information they get, which makes them highly dangerous to us because they're being told one thing which may or may not relate to reality, and we're trying to behave in a way that does relate to reality. So we have to make it part of our goal to make sure that we push this technology into the farthest reaches of the world society. And there won't be a single way to do it. The deployment systems for all of this technology are going to be more varied and faceted than I have time to try and list. Just think about all of the supply channels that go into giving you anything you have that you like. Your computer, your TV, your game console, your automobile, your smartphone, your clothes, whatever, and clothes will be smart. Whatever things that you have, think about the distribution channels, the manufacturing channels, the design cycle channels, the inventory supply channels, et cetera, and it's a humongous sea of channels. There's no one single way to get there. So, you're here. That means you want to change things. You wouldn't be here if you didn't want to change things, if you didn't think things were going to change, and you want to be a part of it. So I applaud you, Neil already did that, for being here, for participating. I hope that you will make your contribution available to everyone and that you will make it affordable by everyone. You need to take care of the technology before it takes care of you. You don't want Skynet. A lot of people think that we're going to get Skynet. A lot of people are afraid of what AI is doing to us rather than what AI is going to do for us. I don't share that fear or that belief. I don't think that there's any way that we can't control the technology, not that we haven't lost control of technology from time to time. The 737 would be a good example. But those are minor disruptions. Those are not long-term disruptions. So we can do it. So in summary, the architectures are here. We've got the technology to do this. It gets better all the time. I think that as these processors proliferate, we will find that the memory will proliferate with them and that it will be better to put the processor in the memory rather than have the memory outside of the processor. The future diversity is going to require a heterogeneity of processors. Not going to be one processor that satisfies all situations. We'll have multiple processors, and we'll have them together. Your smartphone is a great example. In most smartphones, you have 5 to 7 different types of processors. You have a CPU, a GPU, a DSP, an ISP, a DP display processor, 2 communication processors, and some others I've probably forgotten. All of that in a smartphone. It's a perfect example of a heterogeneous system. Our robots are going to have to see, and they're going to have to see intelligently. They're going to have to be able to feel as well as touch and hear. That's stuff that we have to design and build. And we will have to be diligent to stay on top of these machines that we're building. Asimov's law of robots is something we should strive to try and get built in. And just one little footnote. You remember ENIAC? 50 years after ENIAC was built, you can do the same thing with a piece of silicon the size of a dime. So that's the kind of developments that we've seen in just 50 years. 50 years doesn't hardly get mentioned in a history book anymore. But 50 years seems like forever when you're trying to design something. And that's it for me. Are we done?